Welcome to the program. We call the message of this program Slovakia and the Political Influence of the Catholic Church. I was in Prešov in the year 2000 where I visited that city and I met with believers and I was seeing with my own eyes Roman Catholicism in that eastern part of Slovakia, and it was a shock to me. But even deeper of a shock, rather than just seeing Roman Catholicism, was the announcement that was made that year. And I had the response from the Slovakian believers to the concordat that was put into effect from that year 2000, in the year 2000, and it was a shock to me because I knew how concordats had really brought in the power of the Roman Catholic system in other nations. It was going back to the very beginning of the Vatican state, where there was a concordat with Mussolini, where the Vatican was set up as a civil power on what had been an Italian state, and it was carved out of Italy, and the independent nation of the Vatican is 108 acres, just a small little territory, became an independent civil power. The Vatican had again civil power, which it had before. It had fallen from civil power when at the time of the revolution and the whole Napoleon Bonaparte and the Pope being taken from his throne and civil power being taken from the Pope. It was reinstigated with the concordat between the Vatican and Mussolini, and then we had the famous concordat with Hitler. I think it was 1933 exact, where Hitler entered in with Pius XI, and then it was nailed down under Pius XII. Pius XI had been in Germany as a representative, legate from the Vatican, and then he was to become the next Pope Pius XII, and he entered into concordat with Hitler, and that defended Hitler from any statements that the Catholic Church would make against his regime and all the horrors that went on in World War II. And there was a legal agreement that had devastating effect on believers, particularly the true believers, and of course the Roman Catholic Church was able to increase in leaps and bounds in the financial help that it got from government and the way the people paid money to the Catholic Church through the state, and the civil upholding of Catholic education, Catholic marriages, and on and on. It has been the same right across the South American world where I lived as a Catholic priest. I was very conscious of the South American nations that had concordats. Where there was a concordat, usually we found that the Catholic education system predominated with the financial help of the system. It was the educational system that was recognized by the government. We saw the Catholic Church enforcing its marriage laws and what it calls annulments and everything on the people through civil law. And it was in those nations that the other churches were really being held back because they were not seen as part of the Catholic Church and those that the Catholic Church recognized in its ecumenical outreach. It has been devastating. I cannot give nation after nation. That would be too long. I have a whole program which I made called the Vatican Control Through Civil Power, where I go through nation after nation and what nations who have signed on to concordats with Rome. But actually to know this and to be in Slovakia the very year that this concordat was brought into existence was a shock to me, and I knew that this was going to really limit the gospel going forth, or an attempt to limit the gospel going forth, and to put into effect Roman Catholic institutions whereby their schools will be funded and recognized by the state, that this would be civil power of the church, that the Roman Catholic Church is not simply a religious system, it's a civil system. And when they make a legal agreement, they call it the Holy See. They call themselves the Holy See and the nation that they're making it with. And it's written down in civil law. So these laws become part of the civil law of the state. So it's not simply that the bishop is objecting to an evangelical church, but it is the civil powers can object to an evangelical church. And we've had some nations where it's the police that come to close down a Christian radio station or some sort of an evangelical message going out, that it's the civil authorities. And I know myself from reading the scripture that these things were spoken of even before the Reformation. The Vaudois, for example, and the Waldenses that followed them were very conscious that the Catholic Church was a civil system in the olden days before it was reinstituted then with Mussolini in recent times in the 20th century. But they were very conscious that the woman rides the beast, as it says in Revelation chapter 17 verse 3, that the woman is the religious system, rides the beast. The civil system is what the Catholic Church tries to gain control through civil law. And it was through the 605 years of the Inquisition that the Catholic Church got the civil authorities to put people to death. Very few people are conscious of that. But those who lived in Europe at the time of the Inquisition were very conscious of what it means the woman rides the beast, because it was the civil powers that were putting people to death and having them tortured, even though the judges and a lot of the people who accused people were Catholic prelates, bishops, archbishops and priests. But it was the civil power, the Catholic Church working together with the civil power. And so people are not conscious of these things, but at the time of the Reformation, the believers were very conscious that the Catholic Church was not just a religious power that was seeking to control religion throughout the world, but it was using civil means. And this is an eye-opener. Many believers do not realize this. But I want to come to Slovakia and how these political maneuvers of the Catholic Church have been instigated. So can you, Jan Sichula, give us some information of how these political endeavors of the Catholic Church affect Slovakia as such?
Yes. So let me first start by a little bit of historical review of last 20 years of Slovakian history. Now, it was in 1989 when the fall of communism took place in an event that became known as Velvet Revolution, because there was no violent force used in the deposition of the communist government, and finally it was desire of Slovaks to be, and Czechs to live freely from the communism and to have a democratic establishment and institutions. And that took place in 1989, and this really opened the door for sweeping changes through the society, and we finally were having freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of meetings, and we really rejoice in those events. I remember it still in vivid memories, because I was back then I was starting to attend the grammar school, and I remember all of the events. Now, under the communism, the churches were fairly strictly controlled by the communist government that was trying to have the control and was having special laws in how the churches are to operate. And there were some registered churches and there were some independent, unregistered groups, even of Bible believers, that were existing in informal meetings among the houses and on various places. Now, for some 10 years, since 1989, actually up until 2000, so we will have some 11 years, it really looked like we will be a society in which the state and the church will be separate, and we might even eventually reach a separation, despite the fact that very soon after revolution, we had a new law established about the churches, and since then until today, which is quite surprising and revealing and shocking, we had the system that registered the churches before under the communism, and we had a new law that continued in the system until today. So we still have a system where churches are registering with state to apply for some advantages for recognition and to apply for the funds. So registered churches are able to accept some funds, finances from the state, and to fund their operations. Now, then there are many groups of Bible believers, independent churches like ours, mine, and Ivan's, and many others that have no kind of registration with the state, and they are working on their own and self-support their ministry. Now, it was later in 2000, after many years of many developments, that Roman Church was able to establish a primary position, so to say, in the society by getting to the point when they were able to sign a concordat. So since 2000, we are a society, a country that is now on the list of those that have the concordat in place, that is valid, and that now really brought a lot of changes. Important is to understand that according to the Slovak law system, international treaties have always precedence over domestic laws. So once the treaty between the Slovak Republic and Vatican State was signed in the form of concordat, essentially every possible clash between some laws will be interpreted so that the international treaty is given a precedence, is primary. So this would apply equally to the situation with the Roman Church. We are seeing many results of the concordat now in place in many areas, mostly in education, but this will be discussed as we will proceed in our time.
Yes, it is frightening to see the laws of Catholicism being instigated by the state. When we see some of the laws of the Catholic Church, and to know that the state is now upholding these laws. For example, the Roman Catholic law 1372, that's the canon law of the Catholic Church, says a person who makes recourse against an act of the Roman Pontiff to an ecumenical council or college of bishops is to be punished with a censure. That somebody is to be punished who makes recourse against the act, a decree or statement or an act of the Roman Pontiff, that can be punished with a censure. And the canon 1374 says a person who joins an association who plots against the church is to be punished with a just penalty. A penalty can be justly brought against them, that they can be justly punished. And where Catholic law is accepted in civil law, we see how serious this is, because we're talking about now control over people who are evangelical by civil law. Now it takes a long time before these things are actually implemented, but it is frightening to see these things being put into effect. Now I'd like to come to you, Ivan. Ivan is also from Slovakia. Hlavanda is his surname, and he is with us today. And Ivan, can you fill in a little bit more detail of how you see this political control of the Catholic Church been put into operation in Slovakia.
Yes, thanks, Richard, and firstly for quoting canon law, because in my experience, most of the nominal Catholics are not aware about those paragraphs that you quote. And to put them into the more light, let me quote from the concordat itself. I would like to quote to viewers Article 2 and Article 3, which would be self-revealing after quoting of the canon laws. Because in Article 2 it says, "The Republic of Slovakia recognizes the right of the Catholic Church of the Republic of Slovakia and of its members to free and independent activity, which includes above all the public professions, announcements and practice of the Catholic faith, the freedom to exercise the mission of the Catholic Church, the exercise of its powers as defined by the canon law." This article alone makes me a possible candidate for punishment, because as you quote the canon law says that I can be punished to proclaim the biblical truth against the wrong, and based on that breaking the canon law, Slovak Republic got the obligation, if it will be required from the Catholic Church, to punish me. And for any biblical Christian who is aware of the power of the Catholic Church during the history and in the recent years, this is the horrifying message. You mentioned Vaudals, and there are other groups, Albigenses, for example, which were killed in hundreds just for standing against the wrong in the biblical teaching. And of course, somebody would say, Ivan, but the Catholic Church changed. And I would rather say to those persons, please go to Mexico, for example, and ask the biblical Christians there how the Catholic Church is exercising its power there, for example. So it means, it doesn't mean that if they are not practicing those canon laws now in Slovakia, there is no possibility that they will do tomorrow until the law of the states will allow them. And let me remind the viewers, just not few years ago, 60 years ago, there was a country called Croatia. And in that country, there was a bishop called Stepinac. And the country had signed the concordat itself with the Vatican in those times. And in that Croatia in that time, there were living about 900,000 Orthodox Serbs. 200,000 of them were forced to be converted into the Roman Catholicism by the power. 700,000 of them refused, and they were killed. And this was done exactly on the same kind of the concordat that we have actually in law in Slovakia. So for that reason, I'm horrified that nobody is protesting against that, and everybody is accepting this as a normal, peaceful treaty.
Yes, we have on our DVD on the Inquisition, we actually show some of the photographs from that horrific these horrific events that took place in Croatia, where the Concordat was put into effect, whereby the Catholic Church did not just use civil power because they had control of the civil power, but in actual fact, putting people to death was actually done often by the priests and prelates themselves. It was one of the more horrific demonstrations of civil power, and that happened in the 20th century. Details are given on the video called The Inquisition, and it is just amazing to see these things. I would like to come back to you, Jean, again, and if you could explain more just how these laws have been put into operation and what the Roman Catholic law is and how it may eventually be lived out and how it is at the present day being lived out in Slovakia.
Yes, that's a very important area to cover, but I would love to first add to my description of the present situation in Slovakia. Now, interestingly, as I had mentioned, there is no separation of church and state. There was none under the communism. There is none now, even in the democratic establishment. Interestingly, we had many governments. Elections are taking place every 4 years. We had right-wing governments, left-wings through all those times, but all the time Roman Church was always interested in cooperation and close relationship with the governments, regardless of the political persuasion and stream. And governments and ministers, prime ministers, presidents were always expressing a desire to have a close and good relationship with the Roman Catholic Church. That also paved the way and prepared the society for the concordat when it came in the year 2000. Now we have it. The concordat is there since 2000, and on top of everything that is claimed in the concordat, it prepared the way, and it claims that on the basis of this concordat, the future further treaties will be established in accordance with the concordat. Now, an especially important treaty was the one that came in the year 2004. It's the special treaty resulting from the concordat that covers the education. It covers the education in Slovakia. Now, it's very detailed. It covers a lot of areas in education, and in its articles, we have, for example, the Article 13, which I would like to quote from that follow-on treaty from the year 2004. So, Article 13, paragraph 1. The Catholic Church has the right to establish, manage, and use for upbringing and educational purposes elementary schools, secondary schools, universities, and other educational institutions according to conditions set out in the legal system of the Republic of Slovakia. So that in practice it means that there since then many primary secondary schools and even university in Ružomberok were established, and they are funded by the state's money, yet they are controlled fully by the Catholic Church, and everything in there is in accordance with the Catholic practice and teaching. Then we have another paragraph which is very important. Schools and educational institutions mentioned in paragraph 1 above have equal standing with state schools and educational institutions, which means that a school established by the Roman Church will have exactly the same position in society, in relation to the state and to the rest of the society as the school established by the government itself. And we have the statement there, as I had already mentioned, the financial contribution for the said schools and educational institutions from the state budget of Republic of Slovakia will be established under a special agreement according to Article 20 of the present concordat. So once again we can see that concordat paved the way, prepared the legal system for other treaties like this one on the Catholic schools. Now moreover, this means that not only we have many now schools established and educational institutions established by the Roman Church, but we also have in law what was established is that the Roman Church has a right to teach the religious lessons on every state school in the country. So they simply apply for the space. They are the lessons on the religion are part of the curricula that is required on the state schools, and we have the Roman priest or other people authorized by the bishops to teach the religious lessons, regularly coming week by week to the schools, and almost every kid will partake of the lesson and will be taught the Roman religion by the priest. So that's something that's really revealing and describing the situation that presently we mostly see the results of the concordat in the fact that on all the levels of education system in Slovakia, Roman Church is able to indoctrinate, so to say, and able to get access to the minds of the people from the early childhood, to have them immediately influenced and taught that the Roman Church is that true church, and here is the doctrine that we are teaching, and that really forms the mindset of the population from the early childhood.
Yes. Can you explain how all of this brings a slavery, as it were, into to the children in Slovakia? When you see that they're under this system whereby the state regulates Roman Catholic teaching. Ivan?
This bothers me, Richard, on the personal level as well. I am the father of the son that he will go to the primary school in September, and we will face those challenges associated with these practices. A few months ago, cousin, son of my brother, visiting us, and we were sharing with him some biblical truth, and when we finished with my fellow pastor, this 6-year-old boy was asking about the practice that is very common in Roman Catholicism, you know better, to put the sign of the cross in the front of him. This was natural and normal for him to ask for any biblical sharing afterwards, because he sees this daily in the school. This is the practical consequences of the indoctrinating kids into the Roman Catholicism teaching. And I am sure that it is not accident that first treaty under the concordat is under the education umbrella. Adolf Hitler said that give me the control over the textbooks and you will give me the next generation. So I'm sure that there is a purpose to brainwash those kids to be, as they will grow, to be more associated with the Roman Catholicism itself. And what is said about that? And it is written in the Bible that the whore of the Babylon is willingly provide cup of inquinity to drink with to anybody who is willing to drink. And of course there is a possibility on the treaty to allow the Protestant teachers come into the school and teach, but there is